Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to what I hope to be the first of many interviews that I'm planning to do with people who have an inspiring story and an inspiring message. And the first person I've invited to be part of this series is Zac Jones. Hey, Zac, thanks so much for agreeing to be my first guest on this.
Thank you very much, Mark. What an honor, man. Seriously, it's an honor.
The honour's mine. So, hey, just to give you a little bit of background to how this interview came about, but Zac and I have never met face to face. Zac lives in Melbourne, I'm in Brisbane, but this is how it came about. A few months ago, I was watching the Today Show while having my breakfast, and I listened to Carl and Ali interview Zac and his mum, Jane. And I was so captivated by their story. So this is a bit of background. At the end of 2017, Zac crashed his car while on a suspended license, high on drugs, drunk, and seriously injured his four passengers. As a result, in 2019, he was sentenced to 4 years in prison and is now out on parole. Wow. He's written a book called Why the Fallen. That's the background you can see behind Zac. And he spends much of his time speaking with young people in various settings about the dangers of reckless living. So that's just a little bit of a background and a message of hope. So, Zac, by the end of 2017, when this car crash happened, and I've read Why the Fallen, and I'll give you the details of how you really get onto this when I finish. Having read that, Zac, your story, and what I want to say is Zac and his mum, Jane, have written this. It's raw, they're vulnerable, they're candid. It's a warts and all story. So, Zac, by the end of 2017, when this crash happened, your life has been spiraling out of control for some time. What do you believe are the key things that contributed to everything going south?
I think that's a fantastic question to kick it off, Mark. So, by and large, my crash, and I will never refer to it as an accident, it was a crash. That was the culmination of, nearly 10 years of poor decisions, bad habit forming, reckless behavior, hanging out with the wrong people, drug and alcohol abuse, lack of purpose and direction, many contributing factors on top of, continuously worsening mental health issues that I wasn't addressing. Instead, I was using drugs and alcohol to deal with those. And so quite quickly, drugs and alcohol became my crutch for processing and dealing with, or just shielding myself from my emotions and my trauma. And unfortunately, when you do that, when you don't work through your issues in a healthy manner, all that hurt and all that trauma manifests itself in different ways. And so for me, it was increasingly reckless decisions. So I found myself in trouble with the police from the age of 13 for, criminal damage, drunk and disorderly, generally just being belligerent and reckless. And so, after I crashed my car and I was being sentenced, when the judge read my criminal record, it painted the picture of a young man who had very little concern for consequences and very little concern for how his actions affect other people. And
Wow.
so, yeah, in hindsight, it was always going, my behavior and the path that I was on, the trajectory I was on, was always going to end very, very ugly.
Yeah. Now, just as you paint this picture, like sadly, we know that the majority of people who end up in that space stay there. They end up in a perpetual cycle of drug addiction, trouble with the law, incarceration, and tragically often death. It's a one-way track to self-destruction. And yet, as I read your story, in prison, you had a massive turnaround. What was it that prompted that massive about face?
It's a It's a very interesting question. So I'll start by saying that throughout my life, whether through lack of stable role models, male role models in my life, I actively sought out my own kind of role models and influences. And unfortunately, I sought out all of the wrong influences in all of the wrong places. So I went from spending my whole teenage years actively seeking out negative influences, to being in jail surrounded by negative influences, actively seeking out positive ones. So, I mean, I watched my mum bawl her eyes out from the front of the courtroom, and I heard the judge talk about the person that I have been thus far in my life, and the way that my criminal record, the person that portrays me as, and I'm still mortally ashamed of that. I still have that criminal record, and so very early on in jail, I was really at rock bottom. I was at a very soul crushing point in my life, and I didn't know if I could continue with that. And so I did have moments of contemplating suicide, which I write about in the book. But one of the first moments of clarity that I had came from one night when I was at Port Phillip, and I was thinking about kind of ending everything. I recalled the young man that the judge had portrayed in the sentencing, and I asked myself, if I died right now, what would be the legacy that I left behind? And as I write in the book, that answer really crushed my spirit, because the answer was, I was a junkie, I was a criminal, I was a letdown, I've been expelled from every school I've ever been in, just no good to anybody. And that was a really hard truth and a hard pill to swallow. But I had a realization that, I wasn't dead yet, and that didn't have to be my legacy. And so I wanted to change the ending of that story. Another contributing factor was when I was being sentenced and at the county court, there was actually about 20 young students from a school that were obviously having an excursion to the county courts. And so they watched as I was sentenced to 4 years, 9 months. And, my mum was bawling her eyes out at the front of the courtroom, and, I'm being sentenced to 4 years, 9 months in jail, and my world is crumbling around me. But in that moment, I remember only being able to think about how much I just wanted to speak and address those young students, because I'd done that exact same excursion when I was in school. And I just desperately wanted to tell them to look at my mum and look at the pain that I had caused. And I wanted to stop them from making the mistakes that I'd made. And so when I was in jail, I straight away started thinking about that, and that stuck with me a lot. And I wanted to stop other young people making the mistakes that I had made. So I weighed my way through the first kind of 3-4 weeks of my sentence, just not knowing what to do, and just having this massive road ahead of me. But when I first got sentenced, I made this promise to myself, and I write about it in the book, that as long as I leave jail in better shape than when I came in, my time hasn't been wasted. And that's, I joke that, a shower and a decent meal would have accomplished that, because I really was a mess. But so every day I woke up with the clear goal to go to sleep a better man than when I woke up.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Zac, one of the things that I really captivated by your story, and I after I heard that on today's show, I Googled you and saw there was a story on a current affair, and I knew, and I listened to that as well. I read some of your stuff, and one of the things that I really valued was hearing how you absolutely took 100% responsibility for your own stuff. Sadly, what we hear is in people in your situation play the blame game. It's my parents' fault. It's my upbringing. It's the government's. It's this. And, you know, you and your mum are open in the book. Life wasn't perfect for you. Your mum clearly loved you from the day you were born, but life wasn't perfect. It wasn't the most stable environment and all that. You mentioned you didn't have the male role models. But what I appreciated is you took 100% responsibility for your stuff to turn that around.
Yeah, it's unfortunately, it's the easiest thing to do is make an excuse and to blame somebody else. It's not an easy thing to accept responsibility, but I can't speak for everybody. But I know, and I made excuses. I had an excuse for everything. Nothing was my fault. But one thing that I realized is that it's not until you accept that you are the problem. It's not until you accept responsibility for your actions that you can actually begin to change who you are. When you learn to take responsibility for the things you have done, you learn to take responsibility for the things that you continue to do and that you are doing. And that is paramount to changing. That is absolutely paramount to changing.
It really is, isn't it? And that's clearly, as I've listened to you, as well as read your book, I've listened to some of the stuff you post on social media, and I've got a confession to make, mate. I never even knew how to access TikTok before you. But after that interview, I saw, wow, I looked on Instagram and Facebook, and I thought, where is everybody? And then I sort of found you on TikTok, and you got mass followers there, and you post some great stuff on there, including I listened to what you shared. Well, what were the things that you actually did in jail to actually, to use your words, make you a better man? Because they were critical, mate. Can you share some of the things that were really important for you in this journey of transformation?
Absolutely. So I'll precede that by saying that all of the changes that I made in jail, I didn't have to go to jail to do that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Great point.
Great point. Everything that I did in jail, I could have done outside of jail at any moment in my life. But, and another thing that I want to say is, you know, as bad as jail was, as horrible, and as much as I would not recommend it, I mean, in Australia, we have an incredibly good, or certainly Victoria, our prison system is really, really good. It has a lot of faults. It is really broken in a lot of areas, but by and large, you have everything at your disposal to either become a career criminal or to turn your life around. It's easier to become a career criminal. It's not easy to get into courses and behavior programs and counseling and all of that kind of stuff. It's not easy. You've actually really got to battle for it, but it's there. So, I mean, the first thing that I started doing was I started training. It started with just push-ups and sit-ups and kind of squats in my cell because I was 60 kilos wringing wet. And I knew first and foremost that one thing that I absolutely hated about myself was the way that I looked. And I thought, okay, well, that is in my control. I can change that. I can eat proper meals. I can eat 3 times a day. I can eat, you know, we get 3 meals a day in jail. You know, you don't starve in jail. And so I had that, and I had the ability to train. And so my first short-term goal was improve the way that I look. And in doing that, I felt better about who I was. The next thing that I started doing was, you know, I began writing my book. And that came about because I've been thinking about, as I said, ways that I could stop young people making the same mistakes that I made. I thought about the idea of writing a book, but I thought, who would want to read about a junkie in jail? And I was about to put to the side when I had phone call with my mum one day, and she said, Zach, I think we should write a book. And I was like, wow, I've been thinking the same thing. The phone cut out, and I just went to my room and I started my cell and I started writing.
Wow.
And one thing that happened before anything else, before I even really understood that I was writing a book, I was recounting my entire life from my first memories to the present day. And in doing so, I relived everything that I could remember, all the bad experiences, all the poor decisions I'd made, all the bullying, the trauma, and I liken it to staring into a mirror of my mind. You stare in a mirror and you see yourself staring back. And so on all of these pages were all of my flaws, all of my mistakes, all of my fears, all of my insecurities, and it was all right there in front of me. And I was, not only was I getting everything off my chest, but I actually had something in front of me that I could go, okay, well, I've never really addressed that. Like whether it was the bullying in school, I've never really sat with that emotion, how I feel about that. And so I kind of began resolving my own trauma myself. But in doing so, I was suddenly reliving, because I dredged up all of these different memories, I was suddenly reliving them every night in my cell. And falling asleep in a cold concrete cell is hard enough, but it was like I was staring at a highlight reel on my ceiling of every bad decision I'd ever made. And so I couldn't sleep. And I went to the medical center at Fulham Correctional Center, and I said to them, guys, I'm really struggling. I can't sleep. I can't go on like this. I'm tired. I'm like at my wit's end. And I was really only at the start of my sentence. I'd only done maybe 3 months at this point. And they were like, okay, cool. Well, what we'll do is we'll just chuck you, we'll write your prescription, or we'll put you on some sleeping medication, and that'll help you sleep. And without even thinking, I said, look, guys, in all honesty, drugs and alcohol is what has led me to this point in my life. I really want to resolve my issues without drugs and alcohol. And I didn't realize what a critical decision that was, because for the first time in my life, I chose not to use drugs and alcohol to deal with my issues. I wanted to do it the hard way. I didn't want the instant gratification of pop a pill, go to sleep. And I mean, they actually, took a second look at me, and they I don't think they'd heard that before. And so they went on their computer, and it was like they were digging into the deepest archives of their hard drive to find some pamphlets and some reading material on mindfulness and meditation. And so they printed those out for me. And they also said, look, would you like us to book you in with the counselor, the psychologist? And I said, absolutely. And so, didn't get any sleep that night, or, any sleep for the rest of that week, really. There was no real improvement, but I read I read what they gave me on mindfulness and meditation and began to practice that. And then, on a weekly basis, I started seeing the psychologist at Fulham, and we did a lot of work with CBT, which is called cognitive behavior therapy. And it is so unbelievable to me that I was 23 years old when I was first learning about cognitive behavior therapy. I think it should be taught from primary school, because it is, first of all, identifying thoughts that come into your mind, how they affect you, how they affect your feelings and behavior, and how you can change the way that they make you feel, and how you actually process trauma. And so, I'm working on my mental health, I'm working on my self-image, and I'm working on my physical health. So there's 3 things right there that I'm really working on. I'm actively seeking out positive role models and positive people who can help steer me in the right direction, continuing to write my book. And I'm starting to realize who I am as a person. And one thing that became very apparent to me was, when I was prior to the crash, I really honestly had started to believe that I was a bad person. And then I crashed my car, and then I believed that I was the scum of the earth. I believed that I was everything that was wrong with the world, and I really hated myself. And so I thought that I was a bad person. And when I went to jail and realized that I was surrounded by people who had committed, you know, equally egregious crimes, equally, you know, abhorrent crimes, that had done disgusting things, but who had no remorse, who didn't care, and it was everyone else's fault. And so the first thing I realized, that the reason I feel the way I do is because I'm remorseful, and I know that I'm guilty, and I feel guilty, and I'm ashamed of it. And so when I had that realization, it was like, well, okay, actually I've got a conscience. And then when I was confronted with really bad people, murderers, gangsters, bad, scary individuals, I realized that no, I'm not a bad person. I've made a lot of bad mistakes, but that doesn't mean that I'm a bad person. And
Yep.
and I began to believe and want to be a good person, to be a positive member of society, to bring, and I say it a lot in my TikToks, bring value to people's lives. And yeah, I mean, I want to put that on a t-shirt, bring value to people's lives. That's and look, all of that aside, and one thing that I will say is that I became incredibly, through the mindfulness and meditation, I became incredibly fascinated with spirituality. I've always been fascinated with spirituality and religion, and I, in Alcoholics Anonymous, one of the steps is find a God of your own creation, find a God of your own understanding, because having a belief system helps you to develop a moral compass of things you would and wouldn't do. You believe in karma, and you believe in those unseen forces. You know what I mean? And so having that behind me as well, having faith and a belief system, has been massive for me.
Zac, as you share all that, you really ticked all the boxes. So you really worked on your fitness, and I know also you eat super healthy now. I see that, and the evidence is indisputable. Not only does that help our physical health, but our mental health as well. You weren't afraid to get counseling, to see a psychologist, to process all your stuff. Your mindfulness stuff. You're exploring spirituality, belief and value system. And the other one that you haven't mentioned, you're a musician, you sing, you love music. All of those things are really healthy ways of really moving forward. And it's really interesting. As I listen to you, mate, what you've experienced is a classic example of what psychologists call post-traumatic growth. Like, we're familiar with the term post-traumatic stress or PTSD, but post-traumatic growth, it's not just learning from your mistakes. It's far more than that. It's out of a traumatic experience when you dig deep and really reevaluate life at the core of your being. And it's like your whole direction and sense of life changes. Well, in no way mitigating the pain of what you've experienced. It doesn't in any way minimize the pain. It's still there, but there's a whole reorientation. And you've mentioned a few times
I'm just going to say, man, you're blowing my mind. I've never heard of that before, but that blows my mind.
Yeah, I'll Google post-traumatic growth. You're a classic example.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And one of the things I've heard you say a lot is you found your sense of purpose. How would you define that undergirding sense of purpose now?
All right, Mark, you asked some good questions, my friend. So
I'm a coach. That's what coaches do.
That is brilliant. That's so cool. So look, I talk about bullying. I've mentioned bullying, and I was really bullied in school for my music and my singing. I have been a passionate musician for as long as I can remember. It's all I've ever seen myself doing. It's the only thing I've been able to focus on for long periods of time. It's the only thing that I've ever been able to get all my emotion out with. And so when I was bullied in school for my music, and I was called horrible names, and anytime I pick up my guitar or I'd sing, I'd be bullied and be verbally abused. And and it made me feel like I wasn't a man.
Um,
And I think this is a really important thing as well, is that one thing I learned in jail was that being a man isn't being tough and macho and overly masculine and really hard. I found strength in vulnerability. I was surrounded by hard individuals, evil, angry, just dangerous people. And what I realized was that, I can't match that level of aggression and well, just that level of aggression. And so for me, my biggest weapon in my arsenal was my ability to say that, no, I'm not a gangster. No, I'm not a hard person. I'm not a criminal. I'm not any of these. I'm not a thug. I'm a junkie who's made every possible mistake you can make. And
yep.
so the fact that I didn't try and prove myself to any of these people, instead I just was who I was. I found so much strength in that, and in doing that, and rewriting my book, one thing that was so clear to me was that music was so fundamentally important to me. And when I stopped making music and I stopped being a musician, I gave away part of my identity. And I've been trying to fill that void in myself with drugs, alcohol, and cover up that emotional man that I was with this hard street kid, which was just a facade to protect myself. So I didn't have to feel vulnerable and weak. So once I'd addressed that and I'd realized that a real man can just be vulnerable, can be himself, can cry, can break down, but is resilient, can be who he is and doesn't need the approval of people, and who doesn't take on the negative things that people say. And so when I reconnected with my music in jail, I finally got my hands on a guitar. There were like 8 guitars for the entire jail at Fulham, 1,500 people, something like that. And I got locked in my cell the first night and I just played. I played every song, and it sounded horrible because I hadn't picked up a guitar in years. But it was like this warm feeling within me. It was like a part of me that was dead had just come back to life. And I found something that I was so passionate about. And having that passion in jail, and in getting out of jail, wanting to pursue my music and having something that I know is positive, that is a really good outlet for me, and that it's not work, it's not a job, it's my outlet, it's my downtime. And having that has been so paramount to me being able to turn my life around, because again, it's my therapy as well.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? When I'm behind a guitar or a microphone, or I'm singing and I'm playing guitar, I feel whole. And so
Wow.
having that has just been so, not just therapeutic, but life-changing. And I talk about it a lot in my book, that you need to find what it is you love in this world and spend your entire life doing it.
That is such a great message. And, Zac, as you were sharing that, it reminded me of your brilliant post on TikTok about self-esteem, where your take on that is what is one of the reasons we end up with low self-esteem is because we're not being true to ourselves. We're not being authentic to who we are. That, as I listened to you speak, that was critical for you in your ongoing journey of recovery. Am I right?
Absolutely. And so the basis of what I was trying to get across there is that low self-esteem comes from not recognizing the value in your true authentic self. And part of the reason why people become so easily influenced is because they look to other people as to how they should be, or what makes them strong and important and valuable, whether it's money or status or any of these things, because they're looking. It's like in The Alchemist. We look all around us, and we'll search all over the world for the treasure that is within us and that has been with us the entire time. And I believe every single person out there has the potential to bring value. And I believe that we live in a day and age where we constantly compare ourselves to other people, and we use everyone else as a measuring stick for our own self-worth, rather than just learn to love ourselves and invest our time in who we truly are, not wearing masks, not trying to be something that we're not, but learning to live comfortably in our own skin.
Oh,
Yeah.
so well said. Mate, I could listen to you all day. You've really dug deep. Your message is profound, and it has to get out there. Oh, it has to. Just one more question before we start to wrap this up. I've tracked with a lot of people in similar journeys to you, and I'm under no illusion that to continue moving forward is a challenge. You can't afford to take your foot off the pedal, so to speak. What are some important things for you in really remaining resilient when you face challenges now?
Oh, I love that. So your analogy for foot off the pedal is the nail on the head. I say this so much, and I mean, at the moment, I am working pretty much full time. I study, I'm doing my public speaking, I'm recording an album, I'm doing a million things. I don't have a day off. I just go, 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 go. And I think part of that comes from, I have this momentum and I have my foot to the floor, and I deal with this constant feeling of being 10 years behind everybody else, because I wasted 10 years or 8 years on the drugs and then 2.5 years in jail. And so I constantly feel like I need to catch up. And I suppose, that is me being guilty of comparing myself to other people. I'm on my own journey, but I do have high expectations of myself. And I feel like if I let my foot off for even a second, sometimes I worry that, I'll relax and I'll get comfortable, and I'll stop trying to achieve what I want to achieve. But something that is incredibly is a massive aid to me, I've said it before, is my passion. So because I'm working so much, I do often get down, because I have moments where I'm like, what is it all for? And for me, I have my music behind me. So when I have those moments of what is it all for, well, everything that I'm doing affords me the ability, first of all, to make music, to play music, and to have that joy in my life. But and it's the reason why I wrote the book, is because fundamentally what I want to do is I want to help people. And if I take a step backwards, I'm no longer helping anybody. If I was to get back on the drugs, or if I was to start drinking again, as far as I'm concerned, that unvalidates everything that I've done and everything that I'm trying to teach people. So I feel this massive responsibility to everybody who supports what I'm trying to do in terms of stopping other young people going down the wrong path. I owe it to these people to live up to the promises that I've made, not just to myself, but in that I have changed. So I'm very lucky, because that responsibility and that feeling that I that feeling that I owe people this as well. It's incredibly powerful. I don't want to let anybody down. Don't want to let myself down, but I want to help people. I want to bring value to people's lives. And I say that all the time, and I probably sound like a broken record, but yeah, the knowledge that what I'm doing right now is helping people, and that people are benefiting from it and are relating to my story. They're all just, it's just fuel for the fire. Does that make sense?
It makes absolute perfect sense. And I know I said last question, but just got one more because you've raised something that's really important. And I know that you know this, Zac. What you just said, we all absolutely get it, because the fear of going back there is what drives you to keep going. But I know that you can't work 7 days a week forever. You've got, that's the next part of your journey. You've got to be able to slow that down. Who is on your team that helps you do that and keeps you accountable for in that way?
Well, I mean, first of all, my mum. So, if I went back to my old self, I think my mum would just about drop me off at jail herself.
Yeah.
So, and no, she is absolutely loving. She's my biggest support. But she she would not tolerate me going backwards. And I think I'm incredibly grateful for that. She gives me a kick up the bum when I need one. And so and because I don't want to let her down anymore, I talk about not wanting to let people down. And first and foremost, I don't want to let her down. I've broken her heart.
Yeah.
Let's just say 20 plus years, man. I'd rather see her cry tears of joy.
Oh, yeah.
So I have her. I have a beautiful girl with me. Her name's Haley. She's just an absolute blessing in my life. Great woman. But this goes back to what I was saying before. I've received so much support from absolute strangers who just believe in me and believe in what I'm trying to achieve. And I owe it to them to make it happen, and they keep me motivated. I find I take so much from the support that other people show me. It is so empowering, and I'm incredibly grateful for it every single day. Every single person who reaches out, or that I discuss or I talk with, it just drives me even more.
Oh, wow. Thanks for sharing that, mate. As I said to you before this interview, you are one seriously high quality young guy. You really are. And my motivation for doing this interview and sharing it is to get the word out there. So what I want to say to us, make sure I'll put the details where I post this, but if you Google Zac Jones, Z-A-C Jack, or Google Why the Fallen, you'll find the link to the website. You'll find the link to the book. Read the book, but share this. This is going to YouTube. Share it around on your own networks, because Zac, he speaks in schools, to young people in community groups. As you've heard by this, he is a really compelling speaker. Let's support him in getting the word out, because if you're like me, it breaks our heart to see so many of our beautiful young people on a one-way track to self-destruction. So, hey, we can do our bit by connecting and then with people like Zac to share this message. Zac, thanks so much again, mate. Really appreciate your time.
I'm so humbled by you, Mark. Thank you so much, man. I'm really touched. I really am. And thank you for this opportunity.
You're most welcome, mate. Thanks, everyone. Until next time.
It's been fun.
So it has been fun. And by the way, I met Zac's mum, Jane, beforehand, and we may do an interview with this to hear it from a parent's perspective as well. But more on that later on. Cheers for now.
Bye.